So, episode 1 is often seen as a really good episode. It's often seen as a really bad episode. For a lot of people, it's probably more in the middle, but it is a very divisive episode. Um, so, when it first came out, people, you know what? I don't even know. I wasn't there. So, I'm just going to say people loved it and hated it, probably, but I can't tell. I know that I really enjoyed this episode. I remember episode 1 as a when I was a young kid and how important it was to me. And yes, Jar Jar is funny, at least to me as a kid. He still is a bit now, but not quite as much. So overall, my thoughts on it are really good because I grew up with it. I have nostalgia towards it. I'm obviously going to be biased, but that doesn't mean that it's a faulty opinion. It's just there's a reason I have this opinion. So, with that out of the way, let's just go through it start to finish and talk about all the awesome stuff in it and even the bad stuff too. So, the title crawl isn't quite as good as, say, episode 4. That one has a good title crawl, but it's not too bad. It mentions, like, the taxation of trade routes and that kind of stuff, but, like, if you don't know, it doesn't really matter that much to the story. You kind of understand, oh, there's a dispute. Oh, the greedy trade federation is attacking Naboo, and all the important stuff is there, even if you don't understand the political side of it. And it's a good explanation for those who do know the political side of that. They're like, oh, that makes sense. We're here in the story, um, and it just explains a lot. But then you see that ship go in, and nothing super significant or cool happens other than I'd say the introduction of Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon is cool just because I like them as characters. You get to see Obi-Wan as a young kid, which for many people was like probably a big thing considering Obi-Wan was a character from the original trilogy who they only saw as old and now he's young. So that must have been a big thing, but can't relate. I've always seen him as just Obi-Wan um, in um, all of his versions. So Obi-Wan shows up, Qui-Gon shows up. They're talking about the living force and the cosmic force, which they're not talking too extensively about it, so there's not much there. At least I don't see much there in that little scene, but there is some. They kind of introduce the idea. Um, but then they get attacked by the Trade Federation, and also you get to see Sidious order the attack, which is cool. You get to see Darth Sidious controlling from the shadows like always. Kind of shadows. He's technically glowing, but he's got a cowl on, so he's hiding his face. Um, so yeah, they get attacked. It's a cool scene. Epic music. That's like some of the coolest. Yeah. Um, Paying attention to the music for just a second in the Phantom Menace specifically is super good. Like, Duel of the Fates. Obviously, everyone points out Duel of the Fates. Oh, it's such a good soundtrack. Um, but even just outside of Duel of the Fates, so much good music came from the Phantom Menace, and it's used very well in this episode. Um, One scene that pops out to me for how they use the music super well is in the pod race. It's down to just Anakin and Sebulba, and then his pod race starts to fall apart, and you hear this like the music start to come in, and it had been absent during the entire pod race, which isn't much of a problem. I mean, with between all the engine sounds and the just sand flying past as the pod racers go by, it's a very intense. You're not like why don't they have music at this part? It's pretty intense, anyways. But then they add the music, and it's this super like exciting, just thrilling. It really puts you in the mood to watch the climax of this awesome pod race. Um, but anyways, going back to the beginning, Obi-Wan has that the negotiations were short quip that I always love. Um, so well said, so well delivered, and just a good line of dialogue, by the way. Um, Everyone thinks George Lucas can't make dialogue, but I don't know. Sometimes he's brilliant at it. There's so many lines that just get quoted all the time, and yet people say he's bad at dialogue. And sure, there are also lines that just fall flat. Um, Everyone points out, I don't like sand. I don't like that. I actually like that line. It's pretty clever. Kind of not that clever, but it gets the point across of who Anakin is and how he feels about sand. So anyways, yeah, the negotiations were short, great line. But other than that, it's a pretty cool but not groundbreaking opening. Then they go down to the planet, they save Jar Jar, and that's where about 50% of people, it seems, go like, and I'm out of here. But I don't mind it. Honestly, Jar Jar is very important to this story, not just in universe, but also for the fans. But he's also not that bad if you don't like him. You can just mostly just ignore him. So as a kid, I really loved Jar Jar. Like pretty much everything he did, I liked. I didn't notice things like him stepping in poop or anything, but like when he got his like foot tangled around the battle droid and started hopping around, and he even took out a destroyer droid, which is very impressive. Or when he like is screaming in that like in the bongo, I think they call it. It's the submarine thing, and he's like screaming around. He's like, ah, we're gonna die. It's pretty cool. And as a kid, I thought he was hilarious and relatable. Um, and he's like, I don't know, and boom, I ended up here. It's just a very funny character at the time. And now that I'm older, I'm like, well, he's not really that funny. In fact, sometimes he's kind of annoying. Look at those poop scenes where he's smelling poop and stepping in poop. But honestly, you can probably just ignore him mostly, and it doesn't really detract that much from the movie. At least it doesn't for me. And maybe that's just because I'm used to it. But I don't know. I feel like Jar Jar is not as annoying as people think, or as people portray him as. But at the same time, a lot of people are like, "Oh, Jar Jar is the best character," and I'm like, "Well," and no offense to Ahmed Best, but I just feel like his character isn't designed for people my age. Um, as I said, I loved him as a kid, and Ahmed Best's performance is so good. His line delivery and his acting is very well done. So good job to him. Um, but yeah, I just don't feel like his character is targeted towards me, and it doesn't land as well as it used to. But moving on from Jar Jar, um, you get to see Qui Gon and Obi Wan in action. You know what? I'm not gonna go in a chronological, like saying my thoughts on every scene. I'm gonna go by like characters and scenes I like. So Qui Gon and Obi Wan, mostly just the action is what I want to talk about now. So the action is really good in this episode. Let's start with like the battle droids. On the Trade Federation ship and on Naboo, it's pretty short, but it makes a lot of sense. I feel like they should have put up more of a fight against the destroyer droids. In the Clone Wars, they take them out all the time, but I guess now they're just like, oh well, we better just run. I mean, maybe if there had been, excuse me, maybe if there had been like 4 or 5 of them, that would have been pretty cool to see just that much blaster fire. Um, but it makes sense. They and the force speed. I feel like that power, force speed. Okay, so as they run away from the Star Destroyers, they move a lot faster than normal. And Jedi have this power called Force Augmentation, which is basically where they're stronger and faster than normal. I mean, it's never been confirmed in canon. I don't, not to my knowledge, anyways. But like Jedi jump really high, they move really fast, they can deflect blaster fire. They pretty much necessarily have to have Force Augmentation. Either that, or they just all happen to have super good genetics, which is unlikely. But anyways, they have this power called Force Augmentation, but Force Speed seems to be a different power that makes them even faster. Which, if that's true, then they should probably use that a lot more. So, I feel like sometimes Force powers aren't used when they should be, and that's because we don't, like, there's not really any cost to them. I mean, there's clearly a strain when using them. You can get tired. Oftentimes you're limited by your talent and your training. But there's not really any cost to them, so they aren't used as often as they could. For example, in say the inheritance cycle, it's very similar. You're limited mostly by your talent and your training, but there's also things like if you overexert yourself, you can kill yourself. In addition, you have to know specific words in a different language to um, cast your spell or use your magic or whatever. And going back to you kill yourself if you overexert yourself. If you cast a spell and you don't have the strength to do it, you can't stop doing the spell. You have to kill yourself basically. And there are ways around this. You can instead of saying like lift this rock, you can say lift this rock very slowly, and then you can and yeah, you basically use wording that allows you to stop, but you have to have a education in that language. You have to be careful with how hard you exert yourself. So there's very clear limits to that, and they show that through when the main character Aragon is getting trained. But in Star Wars, they don't really explain the costs or the limits. So, and I'm not sure there are any. At least Disney doesn't seem to have any, but George Lucas might. But I don't think there are any. I think it's just a cool magic system, and I'm fine with that. I love Star Wars anyways. I would prefer if they were more careful with that kind of thing, but it's totally fine. It's more about the story than the setting, at least for Star Wars. Even though the setting is totally awesome. Spaceships and lightsabers. Oh man, lightsabers are so cool. Speaking of lightsabers, Darth Maul has a double-bladed lightsaber, which is so cool, and I don't really have much more to say about it than that, but it's just a cool thing I thought I'd mention to bring us back to the Phantom Menace. Um, so moving beyond the choreography and the fighting styles of Qui Gon and Obi-Wan, I also love their characters. Obi-Wan obviously gets more development in the Clone Wars and in Episode 2 and 3, of course, and he's played very well. He develops from this by the books kind of character and slowly develops his sense of humor. He learns to improvise and kind of bend the rules just a little bit. He's still by the books, but he's not so serious about it. He's more joking about it, which is so fun to see. Especially like his bickering with Anakin is very, I don't know, just fun. It's a fun time seeing them hang out together. But in this one, he's more serious, and that makes sense because his master is not very serious. And well, he is serious, but he's not. He's rebellious. He doesn't care as much about what the council thinks. He more cares about what the will of the force is. And I feel like his character is very misunderstood. And I might eventually just do a whole episode on Qui-Gon and how I see his character. But what we see in The Phantom Menace and in Master and Apprentice makes him one of my favorite characters of all time. Like Yoda's up there with him, Get Fisto, and in fact, I made a whole video or a whole segment of a live stream. I don't remember which one it was, but you can look in the playlist in the description or click on my channel thing and go there and kind of see it. You'll see in the thumbnail, it's like the top 10 characters or something, and I list out a whole bunch of characters. And I don't know for sure if Qui-Gon is on there. He probably is, because my top 10 changes all the time. So, yeah, just Qui-Gon is an excellent character, even though you don't see him that much or you don't, well, that's not even true. You don't see his full character in this movie because it's a movie. It's only 2 hours. You can't delve into characters quite as much as you can in like a book or a TV show. But even with just what we see, he's an awesome character. But another character who's awesome is Darth Maul. And in The Phantom Menace, he's really cool, but he's not that good of a character. He looks menacing. He shows up. He fights Qui-Gon. He hunts them down first, and then he fights Qui-Gon, and then he shows up later and takes on both of them with his double-bladed lightsaber, and this awesome fight with awesome choreography, and it's one of the best in the saga. And then he dies. with basically no development. He's just a bad guy, which is totally fine. You can have just bad guys. But he's not that cool of a character until you get to the Clone Wars. And when you get to them, he's an awesome character. But I'm not going to go into all of that in this live stream because I'm talking about specifically the Phantom Menace, and in that he's just a cool looking character, and that's totally fine. But moving on, we've got Padme. And Padme's also a good character. I don't like her that much in this episode because she comes off almost like kind of like a Mary Sue, to be honest. She doesn't really come off that way, but there's just not that much there, and what there is usually like super impressive. Like she's the queen of a planet at what age 14 or something. She's good with a blaster. She's like, why would a queen need to be good with a blaster? She should have bodyguards for that, but no, we're gonna have Padme be good with the blaster. She has like a secret identity, so she can be a handmaiden and all this cool stuff. She gives speeches, and she's only 14, and that's the big thing is why is she so talented? And I get it, it's for the story. If they made her any older than Anakin and her, would be really weird, which by the way already kind of is. In my opinion, if I could tweak one thing about the Phantom Menace, what I would probably tweak, and you know what, I should probably think about this, but one of the things I would definitely consider is moving Anakin's age up to like 16, and Padme can move up to like 17 or something. Just make them older so that the story just makes more sense. Like, I get that you kind of want to target kids because that's Star Wars' target audience is kids, but I feel like kids can empathize with older people too. Like as a kid, I empathize with Jar Jar, so, and he's older. But yeah, more seriously, you can empathize with other characters, even if they're not your age. So that's my thoughts on Anakin's age and Padme. What are some other characters in this? What? Okay, first of all, what is your favorite character? Taking only into account the Phantom Menace, and I mean you can take into account how that connects with the other, with the rest of the saga, but just characters from the Phantom Menace and most focusing on the Phantom Menace. What is your favorite character in all of that movie? And while you answer that, I'm gonna move on to my conclusion for this segment. The Phantom Menace it's not the worst episode. There's one that's far worse in my opinion. I don't think it's secretly brilliant. There are plenty of mistakes in this episode and plenty of things that could have done better. In fact, you could almost say that it's not really that necessary. Like it's 10 years before Attack of the Clones. You could make Attack of the Clones the first one, and then have like one focusing on the Clone Wars, and then do episode 3, and maybe that would have been better. Like episode 1, other than like Duel of the Fates, it's not really that important to Star Wars. The story is, but it's not a story that necessarily needed to be seen. Of Anakin coming out of slavery and becoming a Jedi. You could just say, or you could just hint during like Attack of the Clones and show during the Clone Wars, maybe to the Zygerian arc, for the Clone Wars. You could just hint at that he's been a slave in the past, and that will, in fact, that might give him a more understanding backstory if you don't see him as a tiny little kid. But then, of course, there's the whole thing that it's more of a tragedy if you see where Anakin came from and how he was such a good kid, and then he turns to the dark side and kills kids. But I'm going to move on from this segment and switch